Hi friends! Okay, so today we are doing chapter 13 of Psycho-Cybernetics. Chapter 13 is how to turn a crisis into a creative opportunity. So he starts off the chapter talking about athletes and businessmen and when a crisis hits, so either they just fall apart, they deteriorate and the pressure gets to them and they choke up, lose all control and appear to have no ability whatsoever. Or some people actually perform better in competition than practice and they come through in the clutch. And the challenge of the situation brings out the ability that he does not ordinarily possess. So there's two extremes of people who do really well in crisis and people who fold. And then he talks about one woman who is charming and gracious when she's around a small group of people, but when she goes into a public affair, she's totally tongue-tied. And then there's a different lady who, her features are not particularly attractive. You would, if you had dinner with her, you would find her very ordinary, but her personality is kind of on the drab side, he says. But it all changes when she attends an important party. The stimulus of the occasion awakens and brings to life something within her. Her eyes acquire a new sparkle, her conversation is witty and charming, even her facial features seem to undergo a change, and you'll find yourself thinking of her as a beautiful woman. So, I mean, in all, and not just business and athletics, but he also says social settings. So everybody has this ability. And so the difference between all these persons is not some inherent quality that one has and the other hasn't. It is largely a matter of how they have learned to react to crisis situations. A crisis situation is a situation which can either make you it could either make you or break you. If you react properly to the situation, a crisis can give you strength, power, wisdom you do not ordinarily possess. If you react improperly, a crisis can rob you of all the skill, control, and ability that you ordinarily have to call upon. And then they say the so-called money player in sports, business, or social activities, the person who comes through in the clutch, who performs better under the stimulus of challenge, is invariably the person who has learned either consciously or unconsciously to react well in crisis situations. And then he's going to start breaking down three different aspects for us to look at. So in order to perform well in crisis, we need to, 1, learn certain skills under conditions where we would not be over-motivated. We need to practice without pressure. Number 2, we need to learn to react to crisis with an aggressive rather than a defensive attitude, to respond to the challenge in the situation rather than to the menace, and to keep our positive goal in mind. So you're responding to the challenge, you're rising to the challenge, you're not reacting to the menace of the situation. And number 3, we need to learn to evaluate so-called crisis situations in their true perspective, to not make mountains out of molehills, to react as if every small challenge were a matter of life and death. So making sure that we're actually reacting to what's really happening in the environment and not just making up stuff in our own head. Okay, so now so this is number 1, practice without pressure. He's going to break down a couple of things to bring it very clear in our mind what he's trying to tell us. So although we may learn fast, we do not learn well under crisis situations. So what he means is, so he's saying you throw a man who can't swim over his head and the crisis itself may give him power to swim safely. So he learns fast and he manages to swim somehow, but he never learns to become a champion swimmer. So he has a crude stroke and he's going to be stuck in that. That's all he's going to be able to do because that's how he saved his life, is what he's saying. So Dr. Edward C. Tolman, psychologist and expert on animal behavior in the University of California, says that both animals and men form brain maps or cognition maps of the environment while they are learning. If the motivation is not too intense, if there is not too much of a crisis present in the learning situation, these maps are broad and general. If the animal is over-motivated, motivated, what he's getting at is if you throw someone who can't swim and they are so afraid they're going to drown and that they just start kicking and flailing their arms and they quote-unquote swim and they survive, that's over-motivation. So keep that in mind. If the animal is overmotivated, the cognitive map is narrowed and restrictive. They are just trying to survive. They are not trying to learn how to swim at that point. Okay? So in the future, if the animal is overmotivated, the cognitive map is narrowed and restricted. He learns just one way of solving his problem. In the future, if this one way happens to be blocked, the animal becomes frustrated and fails to discern alternative routes and detours. He develops one response, cut and dried, preconceived, and tends to lose the ability to react spontaneously to the new situation. He cannot improvise. He can only follow a set plan. So he's got one track mind of this is, and if this doesn't work, he doesn't even know what else to do. He has no other ideas because he's not doing spontaneous. And if you go back through all the other chapters, when he talks about that creative in you, that creative source in you, it's spontaneous and it's reacting to the environment, current, real time. Okay, and so then he points out a bunch of examples about rats, and if they were put into a maze where they weren't really hungry, they figured out all different kinds of routes, and if they put them into a route when they were starving, once they figured out the one route, and then if they blocked off that route, the second time the rat went back into that same maze, they couldn't find other routes. They'd go to the dead end and just get stuck there. They were just so hungry they couldn't figure out anything else. The other rats would get to the dead end and they'd be like, oh, let's find something else. So that's what he's saying by over motivation. You want to make sure that you're practicing without pressure. The more intense the crisis situation under which you learn, the less you learn is basically the bottom line. So you want to be trying these kinds of things during the day before you actually need them. But the attitude of calmness and clear thinking will carry over from practice drill to actual fire. Moreover, they will have learned something about how to get out of any building or cope with any changed circumstances. They are not committed to a rigid response, but will be able to improvise, to react spontaneous to whatever conditions may be present. So, and that he's talking about why they run fire drills in buildings, because people get used to getting down the stairwells in an orderly fashion and going out. And if this stairwell is full, go to the west wing and do that stairwell. So that's what he's getting at. So that later on when there is a fire, people aren't freaking out and oh my God, this one's closed and what are we going to do? Just go to the other fire well and walk down the stairs. The moral is obvious for either mice or men. Practice without pressure and you will learn more efficiently and be able to perform better in a crisis situation. Now he's going to start talking about shadow boxing. So gentleman Jim Corbett, he made the word shadow boxing popular. So basically he practiced throwing his left jab at his own image in the mirror more than 10,000 times in preparation for the bout against John L. Sullivan, the Boston Strong Boy, blah, 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 okay? And then Gene Tunney, he did the same thing. He shadow boxed. He would imagine Dempsey standing before him. He would imagine Dempsey and making certain moves, and then he would practice his counter move. So he watched hours of footage of Jack Dempsey and learned all his moves, and then he would imagine Jack Dempsey doing those moves in front of him, and he would practice his counter move, and then obviously he won. And then Sir Harry Lauder, the famous Scottish actor and comedian, he admitted that he had practiced a certain routine 10,000 times in private before giving the performance publicly. And then Billy Graham preached to sermons in cypress stumps in a Florida swamp before he was a big preacher. And then another man would line up 6 or 8 empty chairs and imagine people sitting in them and practice his speech on the imaginary audiences. So he basically, what he's saying is shadow boxing is what other people are referring to as just practice run, dry run, just acting it out and actually giving life to it. You can just imagine it in your head, but once you start talking and acting it out, it becomes more real. And remember that your subconscious doesn't know the difference between a real event and a really imagined event. So you start making those neurological pathways in your brain. So that's why they're saying practice and practice out loud and practice for real. Don't just do the visualizations in your head. Okay. And easy practice brings better scores. So, and he talks again about the golfer Ben Hogan and how he would imagine hitting the ball before he actually hit the ball. And some athletes practice in private with as little pressure as possible, and they don't let anybody else come and see the practice. It's just for them to practice. They become human icicles, immune to pressure, not worrying about how they will perform, but depending upon the muscle memory to execute various motions which they have learned. And then there was this one lady who had to get ready to go to a ball, and her husband was like a big shot, so she had to be the gracious hostess and do all the formalities and the greetings and all that kind of thing, because that's what they did. So anyway, what she did is and she used to feel super uneasy, like feel ill at ease in social situations. So not only does she not want to be there, but she really doesn't want to be the host of this thing. And her husband's a big deal, so she has to do it. So then she practiced making her grand entrance in her living room hundreds of times. And she'd walk down the room and shaking hands with innumerable imaginary guests. And she'd smile and she'd have something friendly to say to each one. And she'd be chatting and she had practices over and over and over that she did in her living room. And then when the actual big ball came, what she did is she wasn't ready for everything, but she found herself graciously ad-libbing. And she was very comfortable, and her husband was thrilled because back then it was a big deal that everybody could do that. Okay, so shadow boxing turns on self-expression. The word express literally means to push out, to exert, to show forth. The word inhibit means to choke off, restrict. Self-expression is pushing out, a showing forth of the powers, talents, and abilities of the self. It means turning on your own light and letting it shine. Self-expression is a yes response. Inhibition is a no response. It chokes off self-expression and turns off or diminishes your light. So basically, you're going to want to make sure that you don't smother your own self, because everybody honestly has gifts in them, and don't turn it off. Don't think you don't. Okay, so in shadow boxing, you practice self-expression with no inhibiting factors present. So practice, and if someone is there, you're going to have to tune them out and not care about it, but hopefully you can practice where there's no one around that you just don't care, okay? And you learn the correct moves, and you form a mental map which is retained in memory, a broad, general, flexible map. So remember, if you're gonna learn anything, it has to be that broad, general map. If you're flailing in the water because you have to learn to swim right now, your life and death, that's when you get the narrow map. We don't want that, okay? A broad, general, flexible map is formed, and then when you face a crisis where an actual menace or inhibiting factor is present, you have learned to act calmly and correctly. There is a carryover in your muscles, nerves, and brain from practice to the actual situation. Moreover, because your learning has become relaxed and pressure-free, you will be able to rise to the occasion, wow, that's horrible, I can't say that. Extemporize, improvise, act spontaneously. At the same time, your shadow boxing is building a mental image of yourself. Okay, so your mental image of yourself is actually getting ingrained in your brain, and you're acting correctly and successfully. And the memory of this successful self-image also enables you to perform better, because now your body or your mind and your subconscious mind, both of you, have seen you doing it and say, yeah, she can do that. She can be the hostess of the ball while her husband is hobnobbing with the big wigs, because you've practiced it. Okay, so dry shooting is the secret of good marksmanship. So he talks about people who shoot, oh my goodness, what are those things called? The targets, the skeet shooting, and if they're pulling it too fast or if they're doing it lightly. And so he had this one guy who was horrible. He was a good skeet shooter, but he was not good at killing game. And so then he went out, and his friends thought he was crazy, but he just took an unloaded shotgun, and he shot all his birds that day with no shotgun, with no bullets. But then he was much more poised, much more calm, because he wasn't worrying about missing anything, and he was just breathing through it. And then the next day, when he actually did load his rifle, he shot 15 quail out of 17 shots. So he was like doing really well, because he finally had his confidence. And I hope somebody ate those birds. I hope they didn't just shoot them for sport. Okay. And then, so he was visiting his friend, and the 10-year-old son was like trying to hit the ball. The dad was throwing him the baseball, and he would freeze up. He would just freeze up and he'd miss it by a foot. Like he was just overthinking it, overdoing it, and just choking up. So he said, I decided to try something. You're too anxious. You're so anxious to hit the ball and so afraid you won't that you can't even see it clearly. How many of us can relate? Okay. I said all that tension and anxiety was interfering with his eyesight and his reflexes. His arm muscles weren't executing the orders from his brain. So he needed to relax. So then he said, okay, so for the first 10 pitches, don't even try to hit the ball. Just stand there and don't even try. Keep your bat on your shoulder. Watch the ball very carefully. Keep your eyes on it from the time it leaves your daddy's hand until it goes by you. Stand easy and loose and just watch the ball go by. Just watch it. Okay, that's the first 10 pitches. After 10 trials of this, I advise him now, for a while, watch the ball go by and keep the bat on your shoulder, but think to yourself, okay, think to yourself, you're going to bring that bat around so it'll really hit the ball solidly dead center. So now he's starting to visualize it. So the first thing he did is he let it go by, and now it's not so scary. Like, yeah, so what if you miss the ball? Like, no big deal. Okay, you're still breathing. You get another shot. So the second time he's like, okay, now you're holding it and you're visually seeing yourself hitting through that ball. So after this, okay, so think to yourself, you're going to bring the bat around so it will really hit the ball solidly and dead center. After this, I told him to keep on feeling the same way. And you're going to hear this a lot because feeling is the secret. Feeling is a big part of all of this. So after this, I told him to keep on feeling the same way and keep watching the ball carefully and to let the bat come around and meet the ball. So let, and making no attempt to hit it hard. Do not kill it. And the boy hit the ball, and after a few easy hits like this, he was knocking the ball a country mile, and I had a friend for life. Okay, so especially when you're teaching your little kids how to play a sport, if you see them like overdoing it, try something like that and make it easy and make it a game, because if it's not fun, it's going to lose any pleasure and they're going to just hate it. And that's not what life is about, or sports. Okay, you can use the same technique to hit the ball in selling, teaching, running a business. And then he was talking to a salesman who couldn't handle rejections from customers. And so he said, I pointed out that to hit a baseball or to think on your feet requires good reflexes. So not just hitting a baseball, but just thinking on your feet and coming up with reasons. When they give you a no in sales, you're gonna have a good reason to say, well, this and this and this and this. Mind you, make sure you're selling to the right customer. Okay, don't just be shoving stuff down the wrong people's throats. If you have the right solution for them, then share that with them. Okay, your automatic success mechanism must respond appropriately and automatically. Too much tension, too much motivation, too much anxiety for results jams the mechanism. So again, he keeps going back to your automatic success mechanism must respond appropriately and automatically. It just has to flow from you. You can't tighten it. You can't control it. Okay, so your trouble is that you're not responding quickly and spontaneous to the objections of that your prospects throw at you. In other words, you are not hitting the ball that the prospect throws. So you're just not, you're overthinking it. And so then he said, the next time, go with an empty gun. Go with an intent and purpose that you're just going to go meet with the customer, not to sell them. And the purpose of the sales interview would be not to sell, but to realign himself with being satisfied with no order. And the purpose of the call would be strictly practiced with the bat on the shoulder or the empty gun. So just practicing, and then start doing the next step of the visualizing and what are the objections and how would you handle those and blah, blah, blah. And then you're going to build up to being more confident and on your feet and spontaneous with your creative self inside. Okay. How to make your nerves work for you. So the word crisis comes from a Greek word which means literally decisiveness or point of decision. A crisis is a fork in the road. Thus every situation is two-pronged. So Hugh Casey, one of the most successful and calmest relief pitchers of all time, was once asked what he thought of when he was sent in the game in the middle of a crisis situation. I always think about what I am going to do and what I want to happen instead of what the batter is going to do or what may happen. He said he concentrated on what he wanted and felt that he could make it happen, and that he usually did. The same attitude is another important key to reacting well in any crisis situation. If we can maintain an aggressive attitude, react aggressively instead of negatively to threaten crisis, the very situation itself can act as a stimulus to release untapped powers. So again, so you're going into a problem, a crisis, but you're going to rise to the challenge. You're not going to be like, oh my God, this is so terrible, and the sky is falling. The sky is falling. You're going to figure out, how do I react aggressively and rise to the challenge? Okay, so this is the second part. This is number 2. Crisis brings power. Neurologist J.A. Hadfield made an extensive study in the extraordinary powers, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, which come to the aid of ordinary men and women in times of crisis. Okay? And so he says, how wonderful it is and the way in which, with quite ordinary folk, so the way in which power leaps to our aid at any time of emergency. And common experience teaches that when great demands are made upon us, if only we fearlessly accept the challenge and confidently extend our strength, every danger or difficulty brings its own strength. So as thy days, so shall thy strength be. So basically, as thy days, so shall thy strength be. Anything that happens in your day, you're going to have the strength to meet it. So don't doubt that, and head it on aggressively, not timidly. And then he says everything's going to come through you with that confidence. Common experience teaches us that when great demands are made upon us, if only we fearlessly accept the challenge and confidently expend our strength, every danger or difficulty brings its own strength. As thy days, so shall thy strength be. The secret lies in the attitude of fearlessly accepting the challenge and confidently expending our strength. This means maintaining an aggressive, a goal-directed attitude rather than a defensive, evasive, negative one. No matter what happens, I can handle it, or I can see it through, rather than I hope nothing happens. Say. So just keep saying to yourself, no matter what happens, I can handle it and I can see it through. Okay, so keep your goal in mind. The essence of this aggressive attitude is remaining goal-oriented. You keep your own positive goal in mind. You intend to go through the crisis experience to achieve your goal. So you intend to go through it, and you are not going to stop. You keep your original positive goal and do not get sidetracked into secondary ones like desire to run away and hide and avoid. So the crisis situation does not get you sidetracked into a secondary goal that isn't really your goal. And basically, William James would say your attitude has to be one of fight, not flight or not fear. If you can do this, the crisis situation itself acts as a stimulus which releases additional power to help you accomplish your goal. So you're going to find a strong inner strength that you probably didn't even know was there. And this also goes back to the key point that everybody makes, that you have to have a very clear goal. If I walk up to you and I say, what do you want? You have to have this same sentence nailed down, and you can't keep changing it every time I ask you. It has to be very clear. I want to weigh 138 pounds. Not I want to lose weight. That's too vague. Not I want to weigh somewhere between 135 and 142. No, that's too vague. I want to weigh 138 pounds. I want to weigh 138 pounds. Okay, whatever your goal is. And then it gets easier because, so this is like not exactly, but a crisis situation is not a crisis situation, but when you go someplace and they have like 20 different of your favorite desserts, then you go back and you say, what do I want? I want to weigh 138 pounds. How is this going to help me weigh 138 pounds? It's not, okay? So what if you can have just a little bit of one dessert? How about that? Let's start with that. And then maybe later on you don't take any desserts because you don't want them anymore, because you're not wanting them, you're not craving them, but you're keeping that goal in mind, and whatever life throws at you, even though that's a silly example, you're going to always go back and say, oh no, I want to weigh 138 pounds, and that is not in line with my goal, and I'm going to get through this dinner event, and I'm not going to eat 20 cupcakes or whatever it is, 20 desserts, and then you're going to be happy later on because you didn't let yourself down. You were true to yourself. Okay. If your intention or your attitude goal is to go forward, if it is to make the most of the crisis situation and win out in spite of it, then excitement of the occasion will reinforce this tendency. It will give you more courage, more strength to go forward. If you lose sight of your original goal, so if you don't have a very clear goal and you don't even you just lose sight of it altogether, you let fear take over. So you lose sight of this original goal, your attitude goal, your attitude goal becomes one of running away from the crisis, of seeking to somehow get past it by evading it. This running away tendency will also be reinforced, and you will experience fear and anxiety. And that happens. Like, we all know someone who has a lot of anxiety and they keep making the same decisions or same mistakes that keep putting them further on that path. And they have to be the one to make that choice to stop that behavior, because there's nothing you can do. They have to be the one making those choices. If you want to run away, you want to head it straight on. Here we go. Don't mistake excitement for fear. So a normal person who is intelligent enough to understand the situation becomes excited or nervous just before a crisis situation. So even butterflies in your stomach, something like that. What he says is, this is not a sign of weakness. So don't take don't take that as fear. Don't let yourself talk yourself into fear. And he starts like telling you different athletes who would get that before a fight, like Jack Dempsey, and then he would use it to like power him up and go into the ring and start fighting. You know, you play a sport and like you're doing warm-ups and you're doing everything, and you're like, you've got all this energy up into maybe the jump ball or the beginning of the game, or maybe even like 2 minutes into the game, and then all of a sudden you settle in and then you go. I don't know. It's going to be different for everybody, but do not take that excitement as fear. You want to use it to propel yourself forward and keep your goal in mind. Trainers also know that a horse which becomes nervous or spirited before a race will perform better than usual. The term spirited is a good one. The excitement that you feel just before crisis situation is an infusion of spirit and should be so interpreted by you. So don't be afraid when you get nervous or, you know, excited. It is not the excitement per se which makes the difference, but how it is used. Okay, number 3. This is the last one. What is the worst that can possibly happen? Many people have a tendency to magnify out of all proportion the potential penalty or failure which the crisis situation holds. We use our imaginations against ourselves and make mountains out of molehills. If you face a real crisis, you need a lot of excitement. But if you overestimate the danger, then you're likely to have a lot more excitement than the occasion calls for. And all this excitement cannot be used appropriately because you overreacted to the situation. Therefore, it remains inside of you, bottled up as the jitters, and a big excess of emotional excitement can harm rather than help performance simply because it is inappropriate. So you can't get too excited about something and make it mountains from molehills, because then you have all this excitement and it doesn't know where to go, nowhere to get it out of you, and those are the people that get the anxiety and the jitters. Bertrand Russell, and he said, when some misfortunes threatens, consider seriously and deliberately what is the very worst that could possibly happen. Okay, so this is Bertrand Russell, and he says, when some misfortune threatens, consider seriously and deliberately what is the very worst that could possibly happen. Having looked this possible misfortune in the face, give yourself sound reason for thinking that after all, it would be no such terrible disaster. Such reasons always exist, since at the worst, nothing that happens to oneself has any cosmic importance. So whatever happens to me today is not going to stop the sun from shining and the earth from rotating and the clouds from moving and the stars from shining. Like, nothing is going to happen. So then I go, oh, okay, it's okay. Let's see. Give yourself sound reason for thinking that after all, it would be no such terrible disaster. Such reasons always exist, since at the worst, nothing that happens to oneself has any cosmic importance. When you have looked for some time steadily at the worst possibility and have said to yourself with real conviction, okay, this has to be real, not phoned in, and then you say to yourself, well, after all, that would not matter so much. You will find that your worry diminishes to quite extraordinary extent. So basically, you sit back and you go, okay, that's, well, after all, that would not matter so very much. Like, I'd live. If that happened, I'd live. Or if that happened, things would work out. Like, we'd figure out the next step. And then you basically are deflating that worry that you have. So it may be necessary to repeat the process a few times, but in the end, if you have shirked nothing in the face, the worst possible issue, like if you've been like, okay, I'll figure it out, you will find that your worry disappears altogether and is replaced by a kind of like exhilaration, like kind of excitement, like, okay, let's do this. We're going to figure it out. Okay, so that's Bertrand Russell, and he wrote The Conquest of Happiness, New York, Liverwright Publishing Corporation. Okay. Then he's got something, we're just going to skip that. And then, now mountain climbing over molehills. So minor or imaginary threats, which we insist upon interpreting as life or death or do or die situations. We don't want to do that. Someone has said that the greatest cause of ulcers is mountain climbing over molehills. So when a salesman thinks something that is, making a sale is a matter of life and death, or a debutante, she thinks that her first ball is like going on trial for her life, like it's so important. Or someone who's interviewing about a job is scared to death. So perhaps this life or death feeling that many people experience in any sort of crisis situation is a heritage from our dim and distant past, when failure to primitive man usually was synonymous with death. So when fear was a big thing and we were going to die because some cat was going to eat us, some big, what are those things called? I can't think of them right now. Saber-toothed tiger or something. Like, failure meant death back then. And he's saying that's still in our brain, and it is. Regardless of its origin, however, experience of numerous patients has shown it can be cured by calmly and rationally analyzing the situation. Ask yourself, what is the worst that can possibly happen if I fail? Rather than responding automatically, blindly, and irrationally. Remember, we don't want to just be responding. We want to be thinking. So when something comes up, what is the worst that can possibly happen if I fail? And chances are it's going to be not as scary as you made it out to be, and you're going to try again. Okay, so what have you got to lose? So close scrutiny will show that most of these everyday so-called crisis situations are not life or death matters at all, but opportunities to either advance or stay where you are. So basically, you have a chance to make a difference, to do something really great, or you're going to stay stagnant. Few people realize just how potent such a simple change of attitude can be. One salesman I know doubled his income after he was able to change his attitude from a scary, panicky, everything depends on this attitude and outlook to a new attitude of I have everything to gain and nothing to lose by going to see this customer and seeing if I have the solution for him, right? So that's what he's talking about for the sales guy. Okay? And then this is the last part. Remember, above all, that the key to any crisis situation is you. Capital Y-O-U, you. Practice and learn the simple techniques of this chapter, and you can learn to make crisis work for you by making crisis creative opportunity. So by using that excitement and that energy and reminding yourself that what do I have to lose? I have nothing to lose and everything to gain. So everyone have a wonderful day and do something today that your future self will be thankful you did.